All right, call the meeting to order for the 2021 annual meeting for the Hudson School District. I'm Jamie Johnson, the board president. And first on the agenda is to introduce the other board members. We have Vice President Bruce Hanson, Clerk Carrie Whitaker, Treasurer Heather Loughlin, and members Bob Bauman, Kate Garza, and Molly Powers, and Superintendent Nicolette, and our Chief Financial and Operations Officer, Tim Erickson, will also be presenting here at today's meeting. At this time, we'll turn it over to our parliamentarian, Nicolette.
All right, as the first order of business for the annual meeting, we would call for nominations to elect a chairperson for the annual meeting. So at this time, I will call for nominations for chairperson for the annual meeting.
I'd like to nominate Jamie Johnson for the chairperson.
Second.
Okay, we have a nomination, a second. I'll do one more call or two more calls for nominations for the annual meeting, or a chairman for the annual meeting, chairperson, sorry. And one and final call for chairpersons of the annual meeting. All right, hearing just one, I'm going to go ahead and close the nomination process. We do have a nomination and we have a second. Mr. Johnson, do you accept the nomination?
Yes, I do.
All right, by a voice vote, all those in favor of accepting Mr. Johnson as the chairman of the annual meeting, please symbol by saying yes.
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 All those opposed, signal by saying no. All right, looks like the yeses have it. So, Mr. Johnson, I'll turn the meeting back over to you.
Thank you very much. And first up on the speakers will be our Board of Education Treasurer, Heather Loughlin, with the district financial overview.
Thanks, Jamie. I'm Heather Loughlin, and I'm honored to serve as the treasurer of your Hudson School Board. In just a moment, Tim Erickson, our Chief Financial and Operations Officer, will present the proposed 2021-2022 budget for the Hudson School District. Before he does so, I want to share just a few highlights. I'll start by acknowledging that school financing is complicated, with resources coming from numerous local, state, and federal sources. That said, the biggest chunk of funding in the proposed budget, more than 56%, comes from local property taxes. That's right, from all of you and all of us. And I understand that you want to know that your tax dollars are being used well. Providing an excellent experience for all students requires a wide range of investments, not only in people, which are, as you might expect, the largest part of our budget, but also in things like curriculum and classroom materials. Over the past year, these expenditures have also included investments to mitigate the spread of COVID in our buildings and, when needed or desired, to support and enable students learning remotely. Our district is thoughtful about how it puts its financial resources, including your tax dollars, to work, aligning our expenditures with our short and long-term goals. I hope that you, like me, a school board member, taxpayer, and parent, feel proud not only of the outcomes we are achieving, but of the way we are managing our financial resources. The good news is that the Hudson School District is in a strong financial position. While there's a lot of important information to call out in this proposed budget packet, there are just a few things I want to point to. First, despite the financial impacts of the pandemic and without new state funding for the next 2 years, it's important to note that state funding was given in the form of property tax relief only, not as a per pupil increase. So despite that, Hudson remains financially strong. In fact, the proposed mill rate is decreasing by 0.6%. Schools nationwide saw decreases in their enrollment, and Hudson was no exception, experiencing a drop of 200 kids last year. Why does this matter? It matters because the complex way state funding for schools is calculated in Wisconsin separates per pupil funding and equalization aid. So per pupil funding is actually a much smaller portion of that state funding than the equalization aid. In our case, the proposed budget includes just $4 million in per pupil funding, but $20.8 million in equalization aid. Because the property valuation in our district has continued to grow, so we have more new homes, more new businesses, homes and businesses that are valued at being worth more, that's continued to grow while our enrollment has declined. Our district actually has a decrease in state aid this year of about $1.4 million. The second thing to point out is that the budget does set aside $900,000 for improvements and major repair work at our schools. As you may know, this week we are launching a district-wide facilities task force charged with gathering input to inform the board's decisions regarding our district's facilities, including how we will approach some significant deferred maintenance. Just as those who own homes save and plan for major maintenance like roof repairs and furnace replacements, the funds in our board-committed fund balance for capital projects help us take care of the buildings in which we operate. 3, we have a strong fund balance, and we think this is prudent in these uncertain times. Per board policy 3121, we strive to have a fund balance equal to 25 to 30% of expenditures. At nearly 40%, the proposed fund balance for the 21-22 school year is above this range, and we think this is good planning for our district, given the significant unknowns with both COVID-19 and state funding. With so much in flux, we want to be prepared to bridge a gap if needed, preventing large programmatic cuts and/or helping to level out any future tax levies should the 2023 to 2025 state biennial budget be similar to the current budget for 2021 to 2023. Finally, our district continues to have a significant underlevy. An underlevy means that our district is levying less in taxes than it is legally allowed to do so. So, in other words, providing its residents, all of us, with direct property tax relief. In our case, the proposed underlevy for 2021 to 2022 is $550,000. Over the past 20 years, our district has underlevied about $126 million. So the mill rate's decreasing. We are setting aside funds to take care of our facilities. We have strong reserves to help us weather an unpredictable future, and we continue to underlevy. All while continuing to provide a great 4K to 12 experience for our students and continuing to attract, retain, and support our talented, dedicated staff. On behalf of your Hudson School Board, I thank you for your continued support of the students and staff of the Hudson School District, and I am pleased to support the recommended budget for 2021 to 2022. Thank you.
Thank you for that report. Heather, is there anyone that has questions or for Board Member Logan, Treasurer Logan? Hearing none, and then I'll turn it over to our Chief Financial and Operations Officer, Tim Erickson, to present the 21-22 budget.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before you is our annual meeting book. Gives a lot of different information. We like to start certainly with the strategic plan, the mission, vision, and values of the district, because that really drives how we invest our dollars into the district. And so I won't go through that, but there's a lot of good information there, and that's been newly updated. I'm going to skip around a little bit here in the interest of everyone's time. But I'll go through quickly through the topics that will be covered. And if you want to follow along, if you want to pull it up on your phones, you can go to the district website and you can go under departments and financial services and click on that. It will bring you right to the annual meeting booklet. So we'll cover the overview of the 21-22 proposed budget and levy, the impact on property taxes, the comparison of Hudson to other Wisconsin schools, and then we'll move into the hearing, which will be questions and comments in regard to the budget. Addressing some of our budget challenges. We've got a number of those challenges. We're addressing reduced state funding levels. That has been a challenge over about the past 7 years as we've seen property values continue to rise above the state average in most years, and leveling of the number of students in the district. And that causes the district to lose state aid funding. We also need to address, obviously, instructional needs for all learners, professional development included, curriculum adoption, resource materials, and services to meet student needs, of which there are many. The maintaining class sizes within class size guidelines, that's been a driver of our staffing, and looking at sustainable funding of long-term maintenance and capital improvement plans for all facilities, as Treasurer Logelman mentioned. The final funding for elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds, which are federal funds for school districts, is not known at this time. There are a number of districts that are waiting for DPI to come out and give that final determination of that funding. We only have a little over $1 million included in this budget. It's possible we could see up to $5 million, but again, that remains, we have to wait and see and get final numbers from the state. One of the other budget challenges that is not listed here is attracting and retaining staff. We've got several openings across the district, and certainly would put a plug in if anybody is looking for employment. Please visit our website and you can see the different openings that are available out there. We're like everybody else. We have a shortage of folks that are available to work. So it's important for us to get those positions filled. The major assumptions for the 21-22 proposed budget, and I won't go over the items that Treasurer Logelman went through, but as we look at expenditures decreasing by 0.5% at this point, I want to point out this is a proposed budget. The board will approve a budget at the end of October once DPI and the Department of Revenue come out with our state aid figures. So I want to point out that's 4 years into our fiscal year when we know that information. So it does make budgeting a challenge. As we look at the other assumptions here, there's a 2% board approved increase to wages and salaries. That also includes performance pay structures. We're levying $325,000 for community services, and this is to recoup losses sustained during COVID-19. Approximately 72 schools across the state, school districts across the state levy for community service. We are in our second year only of levying for that. And hopefully at some point in time, we turn a corner and we won't even have to do that anymore. But again, this year we have a staffing shortage there. We're capping the number of kids, and that does impact us. Unfortunately, it does impact the amount of childcare slots in the community as well. This budget has an additional $900,000 being levied to increase the board committed fund balance for long-term capital projects. Again, an area that we have to try and keep up on. As Treasurer Logelman mentioned, we have a facilities task force committee that will be starting this week to look at all of our other facilities with the exception of the high school in Rivercrest. An additional $400,000 has been levied for prepayment on bonds. We have some bonds that are in the 5% range. We'll be looking at refinancing or prepaying on those bonds. Additional $500,000 has been levied to increase the board committed fund balance for self-funded health insurance. Self-funded health insurance, the district has saved millions of dollars cumulatively since we started that about 7 to 8 years ago. And we kind of act somewhat like an insurance company, and we need to have reserves to cover large claim years, and you can't predict those. So we have to have reserves in place. Our goal is to shoot for 40% of our claims, and that would be about $3.7 million. This proposed budget brings that commitment to about $2.5 million. So the difference is about $1.2 million to go. Moving on to the general fund preliminary budget and levy. Again, if we look at our total general fund revenues, they are set to increase by 2.2%. That's the property tax line. The largest movers there are the property tax line going from 42.5 million to 44.7. And then We also have the equalization aid. That's where we're losing. We see this structural shift that occurs where we're actually levying more dollars than we take in state aid, and that's been occurring over the past several years. You can see that equalization aid, line 621, which is going from 22,247 down to 20,805. So a 6.5% decrease in our equalization aid. And then we have also funding, federal source funding, which is line 700. That's going from about 750 to 1.5 million. And that mainly represents the ESSER, or the Emergency Secondary and Elementary Schools Relief Act, the federal funding that I talked about earlier. On the expenditure side, we see salaries and benefits decreasing slightly by about 0.5%. We also had reductions in staff here of about 1.8 million in this budget. As we move down the line, again, looking at the larger movers, we have a transfer to special education fund. That's a local effort. Every school district's required to provide local effort dollars to that. We had a small bump up from the state on the special education expenditures that are funded by state aid, albeit smaller. It does not keep pace with our special ed expenditures. And then we've got an interfund transfer to food service, again, a COVID-related issue of about 122,000. So overall, total general fund expenditures are decreasing that 0.5%. Where we're winding up our year for last year, we will have underspent by 5.2 million. And again, a lot of that is COVID related savings. So there were projects that we could not get to. And so we wound up with a pretty large variance. In the budget for 21-22, we have a surplus of 1.4 million. And again, that 1.4 million would be in the form of going $900,000 into the projected committed fund balance, which is down near the bottom of the page. So that's $900,000 to give the board flexibility to use if potentially going for a referendum, or just to be able to do larger projects where you are not going to be able to do those without through a normal operating budget. If we look at the self-funded health insurance, as I mentioned, that would be going up $500,000 to almost 2.5 million. And that leaves a projected unassigned fund balance at just under 40%, which is above the board policy. We also are looking forward past this biennium here. So this current biennium, the district did not receive any additional state aid dollars into the equalization formula. That's our biggest piece of funding. So that was given in the form of property tax relief, and that's good news, but it is not available for the district to use. If we look at the next biennium out, again, we have 2 years of no funding, so 21-22 and 22-23. And then we do feel that there could be a potential where increases in state aid would be smaller in that following biennium. So when you look at that unassigned fund balance, that's where we want to be, I think, for going forward for the next couple of years. On the next page, we'll look at aid membership. And that is how we're funded. And it takes membership units, which are generated by kids, by students. You can see in 21-22, that's last year's number. It's our aid number is based on that last year's number for for the actual student count for 2021. And we were down about 200, a little over 200 students. So when that number drives down, it actually works in a sense that doesn't make sense. We actually lose aid as we decrease in those numbers of students. So that's an unfortunate result of the state funding formula. If we look at the general fund state aid revenue chart, you can see the actual revenues starting in 14-15, and how they've bounced around. They've bounced around quite a bit due to various factors over the years, but you can see the overall trend down. When you look at 21, 22, it's a significant drop, and that's why you see the structural imbalance that we wind up having between state aid and property taxes. On the next page, we have a couple of charts for revenues, and we've got the 2021 actual revenues. And then we have down below that, the 21-22 proposed budget. You can see the shift that is occurring under if you look at state sources and local sources. You can see state sources last year was 37.4%, and the state sources are dropping to 34.75% of the proposed budget. And you can see the local sources are at 58.79 last year, and they're going to 61.06 this year. So that is the structural issue that we have going forward, that we've had over the past few years. Prior to that, we were about a 50-50 funded district between state aid and local sources. On the expenditure side of things, we're in the people business, we're in the kid business, and we provide services. So naturally, our salaries and benefits are going to be the main components of our expenditures. And you can see how that pie is broken apart there. Under the proposed budget, salaries are down as a percentage of the overall expenditures. They're down a couple of percent. And then benefits are also down. Purchase services are up almost 2%. And so you can kind of see how that's broken apart. And I'll go to the next page, Tim. This page is one where it's always a challenge to be able to try and convey what happens to my home when the district sets a levy. We've tried to make this as simple as we can, although it's a complex subject and there are many, many variables to this. But in essence, what we're showing here is we want to show how new construction in the district and increasing values actually help mitigate the total tax impact. So in the first example, we have a change in assessed value and no change in the school district levy. So that's one thing we're keeping constant in this example to really show what happens. So with the change in assessed value, each resident originally owns 50% of the value in the district, and therefore they pick up 50% of the tax. So the total district levy in this example is $3,000. So each residence picks up $1,500 of tax. As that goes up, that does not change the amount of tax that's owed. So the assessed values on each home are assumed to go up equally. So they go up by $10,000 to $110,000. If there's no change in a school district levy, then taxes remain the same in that example. The next example has new construction put into it. So we always have new construction in the district. It just varies from year to year as to how much is happening across the district. But in this case, again, we'd assume no change in assessed value or a school district levy, and we would just add in new construction. So you can see it changes the mix of total ownership in the district. So as new construction comes on, a home assessed at $100,000 under new construction, that changes the mix in the amount of the tax levy. So it was $1,500 tax per resident, as in the previous example. And if you add in the new construction, then we get homes taxed at $1,000 per residence. When you add it all up, it's still the same $3,000. The pie is just split a little bit differently. Under that next table down at the bottom, we have 2021 estimated net new construction. The city of Hudson, you can see that's 2.43% of an increase in values due to new construction, and that was $56,208,000 for 21. And you can see the other municipalities there. Town of St. Joe and the town of Troy are not included in this because the Department of Revenue will not have district-specific data for school districts until October. So we will add and update those numbers as we go through into the month of October and the final the final setting of the budget by the board. On the next page, we have the district historical valuation, levy and mill rate. And if we go down to the bottom of that first section, you can see the 21-22 district valuation at just about 5.3 billion. And that's a 6.23% change. And the total levy at 52.6 million. And then that is a 5.6% change. The mill rate is at 993. So the mill rate drops down just over 0.5%. When we look at this, the 6.23% change in valuation is actually below the state average this year. The state average was 7%. And that doesn't happen very often. In the past several years, we've been 2 to 3 times higher in our increase in valuations than the state average. A state average the year before was 5.5%. So the state average went up 1.5%, which is quite a jump when you look at the whole state, the state as a whole. The estimated equalization value and levy by taxing district, these again are estimates. And you can see what happens is we have varying percentages of change in value, anywhere from a high of 10.61 in the town of St. Joe to a low of 3.41 in the city of Hudson. So that's another variable when the taxes go to be spread across the different municipalities. That will also affect the taxes from year to year. So unfortunately, it's a complicated process and one that is always complex and confusing to people. So moving on to the next page. The proposed budget, the 21-22 proposed budget, this format is required by DPI, by the state. Not quite as useful. It's by functional area. So we can look at the summary on the previous page, and it's a little more understandable. But this breaks it apart by function. So, and I won't go into all of those numbers or a ton of numbers on the page, but essentially the budget numbers are matched to what's on that front page. This one does include all of our funds. So, for example, we have the special education fund, and as you might expect, that holds special education costs. And the next fund is the debt service fund. That is where all the previous debt for the addition at the high school and the middle school and the stadium and the auditorium, all of that is accounted for there. And we have capital projects fund that held the costs of those projects. We do have some dollars left, $451,000. All projects were brought in under budget. And so the majority of those dollars are dedicated for the middle school. They can only be used at the middle school. We do have some dollars left for the auditorium and stadium, and those can only be used for that project. So they're restricted funds. The food service fund holds, as you might imagine, all of the meal service costs, and then community service, which holds school age care, community service classes, and the fitness center. So as we go through that, that is a summary of the different funds that we use. We'll go to the next page, the balance sheet. This would be familiar only if you're an accountant. And so we have assets, cash, and investments. This is a snapshot as of June 30th, 2021. And the cash and investments are at 22 million. And receivables and prepaid expenses are at 20 million. So the receivables and prepaid expenses are not cash. That's important for us to remember. We have to maintain enough fund balance and enough cash liquid in that fund balance to meet our obligations, to pay employees, to pay vendors, to pay for different services. And we get funded in a kind of an odd way. We receive no funding for a period of a month or two, and then we get an influx of levy or of property tax. And then we receive aids about approximately every other month. So it requires us to have enough money in the bank to be able to stretch through those times where we're not getting much funding at all. We also have liabilities, again, a snapshot, different liabilities there for payables and withholdings and net payroll. So the fund balance is a combination of a number of different things. Non-spendable, which represents inventories and some other restricted assets. And then we have the committed self-insurance funding, which you can see on those previous pages. And then the unassigned fund balance of 29,042,000. And again, as Heather, Treasurer Logelin mentioned, the board policy on fund balance is listed there. We also have, as we talked about, debt service. So our long-term debt service ranges from general obligation bonds anywhere from about 2% up to 5%. 5% bonds are higher interest rates, and those are longer-term bonds, and those are some of the things that we'll be looking at, trying to refinance here in the coming months, and that will bring our interest rates down. So it's good to have that flexibility to be able to do that. Again, we're in this budget currently, the levy is at $7.5 million for that debt service. And we keep that fairly constant each year. It does vary sometimes, but fairly constant. Under the next section, which is really other data, this is where we start to compare Hudson to, in this case, the Cooperative Educational Service Agency 11, which is our region. And we look at total revenue per member. You can see Hudson at $14,956 per student on average. And the state average is $15,279. And the CISA average is $15,421. So our total revenue per member is lower than many other districts. Our expenditures, total educational cost per member is higher at $14,195. And the state average is $13,754. So that gives you a little comparison about what that looks like with Hudson compared to state and our Cooperative Educational Service Agency. The next section shows that CISA 11 range and what districts are included in that. And it shows the mill rate. So last year's mill rate was $9.99 in Hudson, and you can see how the others are going through there. And the next section we have is the Hudson School District UnderLevy. This is the piece where the board and previous boards have elected to not levy the full amount. It's very, Hudson is somewhat unique in that sense. So we've cumulatively, from 0203 up till now, we have cumulatively underlevied $126 million. So that's direct property tax relief to taxpayers. That amount has gone down as we've started to see our funding levels change and that mix of funding change, and we've had more dependence on property taxes. If you look at the next section, the 2021 underlevies. So this is just pulling data with districts that have an underlevy of $200,000 or more in 2021. You can see Racine, which is 18,000 students, was at $10.8 million. Hudson was next with 5,500 students at $2.1 million. Normally, that's where we sit, first, second, or third most of the time in the underlevy. And then you can see how the others play out. And then finally, we get to the proposed resolution to set the tax levy for 2021, 2022. And we'd like the person that makes that motion to read that as it is on the page. And again, the tax and total amount of $52,595,000. And then it gives a breakdown between the general fund, debt service, and community service. And that's it.
Thank you, Tim. All right. Now is the time for any hearing on the proposed budget before we would entertain any resolution. So anyone who has comments, concerns, or questions regarding the budget, please come forward. That's my first call for comments. And anyone is free to comment from the audience or from the board. I just want to point that out. And the second call for comments or questions regarding the 21-22 budget. And the third call for any comments or questions regarding the 21-22 budget. Seeing no one come to the microphone, hearing no comments or questions, now entertain motion on the resolution.
Mr. President,
Carrie,
be it resolved that a tax in the total amount of $52,595,074, of which $44,740,149 is dedicated to the general fund, $7,529,925 to debt service, and $325,000 to community services fund. Be and is hereby levied against the taxable property in the Hudson School District for school purposes.
Second.
motion by Member Whitaker and second by Member Hanson. Any further questions, comments on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the resolution as proposed indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and the budget is approved. Moving on to new business, we need to set the date for the 2022 annual meeting. For as long as I can remember, it's always been the second Monday in September, except when we were meeting maybe on Tuesdays, but yeah, we changed it to Mondays a long time ago, so. Is there a motion to accept the Monday would be 1 week following Labor Day?
So moved.
Second,
It's been moved in second. I suppose in that motion that the start time of 7 PM as recommended.
That is correct.
Hopefully we can meet that start time. All those in favor of the date and time being September 12th, 2022 at 7 PM signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Next up on new business is any other annual meeting powers. And I'll make my first call for anyone who has an agenda item under other annual meeting powers, please come forward. Second call for anyone who has questions, concerns, or points of order regarding annual meeting powers. Third call for other annual meeting powers. Seeing no one approach the microphone, and I don't see any raising of hands of anyone, I will now entertain a motion to adjourn the annual meeting.
So moved.
All right, we have a motion by Member Hanson, second by Member Logland. And I want to point out for those in the audience that once this motion passes, then we will then re-adjourn or recommence from the recess from the regular meeting, but we will have a 5 to 10 minute interim recess to get the YouTube connection or the Zoom connection changed, I guess. All right, so all those in favor of the motion to adjourn signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. We are adjourned for the 2021 annual meeting.